Let's talk about the first trick, gaslighting. You know you left your keys on the kitchen counter. You remember the sound they made when they hit the granite. You remember the time on the microwave clock. But when you go to leave, the keys are gone. You ask your partner. They look at you with a mix of amusement and concern. You didn't put them on the counter. You left them in the door again. You've been so forgetful lately. You check the door. The keys are there. A cold shiver runs down your spine. You could have sworn, but maybe they are right. You're tired. You're stressed. Maybe your memory is slipping. This is gaslighting. It is the most dangerous trick in the psychological playbook because it doesn't attack your arguments. It attacks your sanity. It is a methodical process of overwriting someone else's reality until they no longer trust their own five senses. The term comes from the 1938 play and 1944 movie, Gaslight. In the story, a husband manipulates his wife into believing she is going insane. He dims the gas-powered lights in their home, but when she notices the change, he insists the lights are as bright as ever. He tells her she is imagining things. Eventually, she stops trusting her eyes and starts trusting his lies. Gaslighting is distinct from simple lying. A liar says, "I didn't eat the last cookie." A gaslighter says, "We never bought cookies. You're making things up again. Are you okay?" The liar wants to avoid trouble. The gaslighter wants to gain control. The technique relies on gradual erosion. It starts small, a small denial, a trivial lie. "I never said that. You're too sensitive. That never happened." Over time, the victim experiences cognitive dissonance. Their reality clashes with the abuser's narrative. To resolve the stress, the victim often decides it is easier to distrust themselves than to believe their partner is a monster. We see this in the workplace. A boss promises a promotion. Months later, you ask about it. "I never promised you that. I said we'd discuss it. You really need to work on your listening skills." Suddenly, you're not an employee asking for a raise. You're a problem employee who can't follow instructions. The power dynamic shifts. We see it in politics. A leader says something on camera. A week later, they deny saying it. When shown the footage, they claim the footage is fake or that you are misinterpreting the context. They tell you, "Don't believe your lying eyes." The goal is to exhaust the public's capacity for critical thought. If the truth is whatever the loudest person says it is, reality becomes a matter of loyalty, not fact. The ultimate tragedy of gaslighting is the hollow shell. The victim becomes paralyzed. They stop making decisions because they are terrified of being wrong again. They become entirely dependent on the abuser to interpret the world for them. The abuser becomes the anchor for their reality. The only defense against gaslighting is objective truth. You have to write things down. You have to keep receipts. You have to talk to third parties who can validate your perspective. Gaslighting works like a vampire. It cannot survive in the sunlight. When you feel that cold shiver, that moment where you question your own mind, stop. Trust your memory. Trust your eyes. The keys were on the counter, and the person telling you otherwise isn't trying to help you find them. They're trying to help you lose yourself.
Let's talk about the next trick, brainwashing. You meet a new group of people. They're warm. They're welcoming. They tell you that you are special, that you have potential, and that they have the answer to all the problems in your life. They invite you to a weekend retreat. You go. You don't get much sleep because you stay up late talking about deep ideas. You feel exhausted but exhilarated. They tell you that your family doesn't really understand you. They say your old friends are holding you back. They suggest that to truly grow, you need to cut ties with the past. Slowly, your world shrinks until it fits inside the walls of this one room, this one group, this one leader. You haven't been drugged. You haven't been hypnotized. You have been brainwashed. The term, a direct translation of the Chinese concept "shi now," or wash brain, was popularized during the Korean War to explain why American POWs were confessing to crimes they didn't commit or defecting to the enemy. But psychology tells us that brainwashing, or coercive persuasion, isn't a mystical science fiction ray gun. It is a systematic application of social pressure designed to break a human being down and rebuild them from scratch. It relies on 3 brutal stages. The first stage is unfreezing. This is the assault on identity. The goal is to break your existing view of yourself. This is achieved through isolation, sleep deprivation, and sensory overload. When you are tired and cut off from your support network, your critical thinking faculties shut down. The manipulator introduces confession sessions, forcing you to admit to flaws, sins, or weaknesses. They weaponize guilt and shame. They make you feel broken, dirty, or wrong. You start to doubt your own memories. You feel a desperate need for redemption. The second stage is changing. Once the old self is broken, the manipulator steps in as the savior. They offer the solution. You are broken, they say, but we can fix you. They introduce a new vocabulary. They use thought-terminating cliches, simple, catchy phrases that shut down complex arguments. Trust the process. Surrender the ego. Because you are desperate for relief from the shame induced in stage 1, you latch onto these new ideas. You adopt the group's reality because it is the only lifeline available. The third stage is refreezing. This locks the new identity in place. The group rewards you for conformity. When you speak their language and follow their rules, you are love-bombed, showered with affection and praise. When you question them, you are shunned. Your brain, craving dopamine and social connection, rewires itself to seek the reward. You aren't just acting the part anymore, you believe it. To leave the group now would mean admitting that you are wrong, that you suffered for nothing, and that you are alone. The sunk cost fallacy keeps you trapped. We see this most clearly in cults, but the mechanics appear in abusive relationships too. An abuser isolates their partner. Your friends don't love you like I do. Your family is trying to split us up. They break down the partner's self-esteem until the partner believes they are lucky just to be tolerated. The victim stays not because they are weak, but because their reality has been edited to remove the door. Brainwashing teaches us that the human self is more fragile than we think. We are social creatures. We define ourselves by the people around us. If you control the environment, you control the person. The only defense is autonomy. It is the refusal to let anyone else define your worth. If someone demands you cut off your past to save your future, they aren't trying to clean your mind, they're trying to erase it. Let's talk about the next trick. Love bombing. You meet someone new. It feels like a lightning strike. They don't just like you, they are obsessed with you. They text you good morning before you wake up. They text you good night before you sleep. They buy you gifts you didn't ask for. They tell you within days that you are their soulmate, that they have never met anyone like you, that you are the answer to their prayers. It feels like a movie. It feels like the romance you have been waiting for your entire life. You feel seen. You feel adored. You feel high. But this isn't love. This is love bombing. It is a manipulation tactic used by narcissists, abusers, and cult leaders. It is the practice of overwhelming a person with excessive affection, flattery, and attention, not to build a connection, but to gain control. It works because it hacks your brain's reward system. The sudden influx of validation triggers a massive release of dopamine and oxytocin. You become chemically addicted to the person. You let your guard down. You ignore the red flags, the jealousy, the speed, the intensity, because the high feels too good to question. The danger of love bombing lies in its purpose. It is a transaction disguised as a gift. The bomber is not giving you affection. They are purchasing your compliance. They are building a debt of gratitude that they intend to collect on later. The tactic relies on mirroring. The bomber figures out exactly what you are insecure about, and they fill that void. Do you feel unheard? They listen to you for hours. Do you feel unattractive? They tell you you're a model. Do you feel lonely? They promise they will never leave you. They create a persona that is perfectly designed to be your savior. But then the switch happens. Once they know you are hooked, once you have moved in or committed or cut off your other friends to be with them, the bombing stops. The texts go silent. The compliments turn into criticisms. The warmth turns into ice. You panic. You wonder what you did wrong. You try to get that feeling back. You apologize. You work harder. You try to be the perfect partner to earn back the affection they used to give you for free. And just like that, the trap snaps shut. You are no longer an equal partner. You are a subordinate chasing a reward that is constantly being moved just out of reach. We see this in cults. When a new recruit enters, they are surrounded by members who hug them, praise them, and tell them they belong. This instant family makes it impossible to leave, because leaving means walking out into the cold. We see it in abusive relationships. The abuser moves fast. Let's move in together next week. Let's get married next month. They want to lock you down before you have time to see who they really are. The only defense against love bombing is to understand the difference between intensity and intimacy. Intensity is fast. It is performative. It demands nothing of you but surrender. Intimacy is slow. It is built on shared experiences, time, and trust. It requires patience. If someone is trying to fast forward the relationship, if they are declaring undying love before they know your middle name, they aren't falling for you. They are conquering you. Real love is a slow burn. Love bombing is a wildfire. And wildfires always end in ash.
Let's talk about the next trick, guilt tripping. The phone rings. You see the name on the screen. Immediately you feel a knot of anxiety in your stomach. You know they are going to ask for a favor. You know you don't have the time, the energy, or the money to help. You are prepared to say no. You answer. You explain your situation politely. Then there is a pause, a heavy sigh on the other end of the line. And then the voice comes back, soft and wounded. Oh, I understand. I guess I just thought, after everything I've done for you, that I could count on you. But it's fine. I'll figure it out. I'll just stay here alone. The trap snaps shut. You feel a crushing weight on your chest. You feel like a villain. So you backtrack. You apologize. You say, "Fine, I'll come." You've just been guilt-tripped. It is one of the most common forms of psychological manipulation used by parents, partners, and friends. It is the art of using someone's conscience against them. It weaponizes your own empathy to force you into compliance. Guilt, in its natural state, is a healthy emotion. It is a social alarm bell. If you steal something or hurt someone, guilt tells you that you have violated the social contract. It prompts you to apologize and repair the bond. It keeps us moral. But a guilt tripper hacks this system. They trigger the alarm bell when no crime has been committed. They equate saying no to a request with betraying the relationship. They imply that if you were a good person, you would agree. Therefore, by refusing, you are admitting to being a bad person. This tactic relies heavily on the covert contract. The manipulator does nice things for you, cooks dinner, buys gifts, listens to your problems. But they aren't doing these things for free. They are keeping a ledger. They are building a debt that you don't know about. When they want something, they cash in. I cooked for you all week and you won't do this one thing for me? You didn't ask them to cook. You didn't sign a contract exchanging lasagna for obedience, but the guilt tripper acts as if the contract is binding. The most dangerous element of guilt tripping is that it works best on the kindest people. If you were a sociopath, you wouldn't care. The tactic would fail. It only works because you value the relationship. It only works because you don't want to be selfish. The manipulator uses your best quality, your empathy, as a lever to control you. We see this in parenting. I gave up my life for you and you can't visit for one weekend? This frames the child's independence as an act of cruelty against the parent. We see this in romantic relationships. If you really loved me, you wouldn't go out with your friends tonight. This frames the partner's autonomy as a lack of devotion. The tragedy of the guilt trip is that it works in the short term, but destroys the relationship in the long term. It replaces love with obligation. When you say yes out of guilt, you aren't being generous. You are paying a ransom. You start to resent the person. You start to avoid their calls. The relationship becomes a minefield where you are constantly trying to avoid stepping on their feelings. The only defense against a guilt trip is to recognize the difference between responsibility and manipulation. You are responsible for your actions. You are not responsible for managing someone else's disappointment. If someone is disappointed that you said no, that is their emotion to handle. If they try to make their disappointment your fault, they are crossing a line. To break the cycle, you have to be willing to sit with the discomfort. When they sigh, when they play the victim, when they say, I guess I'm just not important to you, you have to hold the line. You have to realize that a relationship based on a scorecard isn't a relationship. It's a hostage situation. Real love doesn't keep a ledger, and real generosity doesn't demand a receipt.
Let's talk about the next trick: cultivating dependence. Imagine you are struggling to fix a leak in your sink. You are frustrated. You are tired. Then your partner walks in. They gently take the wrench from your hand. They say, "Here, let me do it. You know you're not good with tools. I don't want you to hurt yourself." You feel a wave of relief. They fix the leak. You thank them. The next week, it's the bills. "Let me handle the finances," they say. "Math stresses you out. I'll take care of it." A month later, it's a conflict with a friend. "Let me talk to them," they say. "You're too emotional to handle this right now." Slowly, almost invisibly, your world begins to shrink. You stop fixing things. You stop managing money. You stop fighting your own battles. You haven't just been helped, you have been disabled. This is the psychology of cultivating dependence. It is a subtle, insidious form of manipulation, where one person systematically erodes another person's agency until the victim believes they cannot survive on their own. It is the creation of a golden cage, built not with bars, but with help. Unlike gaslighting or abuse, which feel hostile, cultivating dependence often feels like love. It masquerades as caretaking. The manipulator frames themselves as the protector, the savior, the rock. But the goal isn't to support you, the goal is to make themselves indispensable. The tactic works by targeting your self-efficacy, your belief in your own ability to succeed. The manipulator identifies your insecurities. Maybe you worry you aren't smart enough, or strong enough, or socially savvy enough. Instead of encouraging you to improve, they confirm your fears. You're right, that is too hard for you. Let me handle it. Over time, this induces a psychological state known as learned helplessness. If you are never allowed to use a muscle, the muscle atrophies. If you are never allowed to solve a problem, your problem-solving skills degrade. Eventually, you stop trying. You look at a simple task like booking a flight or cooking a meal, and you feel a spike of anxiety. You instinctively look for your savior. We see this often in toxic parenting. The parent who does everything for their child, ties their shoes, does their homework, fights their teachers, isn't just being kind, they are ensuring that the child never outgrows the need for the parent. They are terrified of the empty nest, so they clip the bird's wings and call it protection. We see it in relationships. Financial abuse often starts here. One partner takes control of the bank accounts to make things easier. 10 years later, the other partner wants to leave but realizes they don't know the passwords, don't have a credit history, and don't know how to pay the rent. They stay not because they are in love, but because they are terrified of the logistics of survival. We even see it in the workplace. The manager who hoards information, refuses to delegate, and insists on approving every tiny decision is cultivating dependence. They want to be the indispensable linchpin. They make sure the department falls apart without them, securing their job at the expense of the company's health. The danger of this manipulation is that it feels safe. The world is scary. Having someone shield you from it feels good. But the price of that safety is your freedom. The manipulator is driven by a deep fear of abandonment. They believe that if you are strong, you will leave, so they make you weak to keep you close. They don't want a partner. They want a dependent. The only way to break this cycle is to reclaim the discomfort of doing things badly. You have to be willing to fix the sink and flood the kitchen. You have to be willing to pay the bill late. You have to be willing to fumble. Competence comes from failure. Resilience comes from struggle. If someone is constantly removing the struggle from your life, they're not saving you. They're stealing your growth. A crutch is a wonderful tool if your leg is broken. But if someone breaks your leg just so they can sell you the crutch, that isn't help. That is capture. Let's talk about the next trick, learned helplessness. Imagine an elephant at a circus. It weighs 5 tons. It can uproot a tree with its trunk. It could crush a car. Yet it is held in place by a thin rope tied to a small wooden stake in the ground. Physically, the elephant could snap the rope like a thread. It could walk away whenever it wanted. But it doesn't. It stands there, docile and defeated. Why? Because when the elephant was a baby, it was tied with a heavy chain to a concrete block. It pulled and pulled, but it wasn't strong enough. It tried for weeks.
Eventually, the baby elephant learned a lesson. When I am tied, I cannot escape. Now, years later, the elephant is powerful enough to break free, but the lesson remains burned into its brain. It doesn't try because it believes trying is useless. This is learned helplessness. Discovered by psychologist Martin Seligman in the 1960s, it is one of the darkest and most revealing concepts in behavioral science. It explains why people stay in jobs they hate, why citizens stop voting in corrupt nations, and why students stop studying after failing a few tests. It is the belief that your actions have no effect on the outcome. And once that belief takes root, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Seligman's original experiments were controversial. He placed dogs in a box with a floor that could deliver a mild shock. Group A could stop the shock by pressing a lever. They learned they had control. Group B was shocked, but the lever didn't work. The shocks were random and unavoidable. They learned they had no control. Later, both groups were put in a new box. This box had a low barrier. All the dogs had to do to escape the shock was jump over the wall. The dogs from Group A jumped immediately. The dogs from Group B, the ones who had learned that their actions didn't matter, didn't even try. They lay down and whined. The exit was right there, but they couldn't see it because their minds had already accepted defeat. This phenomenon transfers perfectly to humans. It is the core architecture of depression and burnout. When you try to change your life, apply for jobs, lose weight, fix a relationship, and you fail repeatedly, your brain starts to calculate the return on investment of effort. If effort consistently yields zero results, the brain flips a switch. It decides that agency is an illusion. It stops generating the energy required to try. You become the elephant. We see this in politics. When a population feels that the system is rigged, that no matter who they vote for, the corruption remains, they stop voting. They become apathetic. The government relies on this apathy. A population that has learned helplessness is easy to control because they won't pull on the rope. We see it in the education system. A student fails math twice. They decide, I'm just not a math person. They stop doing the homework. They fail the next test. This confirms their belief. They aren't failing because they lack ability. They're failing because they have stopped engaging with the problem. The tragedy of learned helplessness is that it blinds you to change. The circumstances might have improved. The rope might be thinner. The door might be unlocked. But because you stopped checking, you remain trapped in a prison that no longer exists. So, how do you break the conditioning? You cannot just think positive. You have to prove to your brain that it is wrong. You need small wins. You don't try to break the chain all at once. You wiggle the stake. You accomplish one tiny task. You send one email. You walk for 10 minutes. You have to retrain your brain to see the connection between effort and result. The moment you realize the stake is loose, the illusion shatters. The rope isn't holding you. Your memory is, and memories can be rewritten.
Let's talk about the next trick, Stockholm Syndrome. Imagine a world shrunk down to a single locked room. For days, maybe weeks, you exist solely in relation to your captor. Your life, your food, even your right to breathe is entirely at their whim. The police are outside. The world is out there, but in here, there is only the person holding the gun. Then, they offer you a blanket. They share their bottle of water. They tell you about their childhood, And in that moment, something tectonic shifts in your mind. You don't think, they are still my captor. You think, they could have let me freeze, but they gave me the blanket. They could have kept all the water, but they shared it. A seed of gratitude takes root, a perverse form of relief that supplants terror. You are no longer just a victim. You are a survivor being cared for. This is the psychological paradox known as Stockholm Syndrome. It is a coping mechanism, a deep, twisted survival strategy that the brain enacts under extreme duress. It takes its name from a 1973 bank robbery in Stockholm, Sweden, where 4 hostages, after 6 days of captivity, defended their captors and refused to testify against them. But the mechanism is older than the name. It is the creation of a trauma bond, a powerful emotional attachment formed in the shadow of potential death or severe harm. The tactic works because the mind operates on a principle of scarcity and power. When all your basic needs are controlled by one person, that person is no longer just a threat, they become the ultimate source of life. The abuser or captor holds the power to hurt and the power to not hurt. The victim's survival instinct drives them to focus obsessively on the non-harm. Every moment of silence, every small reprieve from terror is registered as a favor, a kindness, or even proof of a shared humanity. The brain makes a subconscious trade. If I show loyalty, if I demonstrate understanding, if I align with the captor's perspective, I increase my chances of survival. This mechanism is cemented by 3 critical conditions. First, there must be a genuine, life-threatening perception of danger. Second, the captor must provide small acts of kindness, which are often nothing more than the absence of abuse. And third, and crucially, the victim must be isolated from external perspectives, making the captor's reality the only reality. The ultimate betrayal of Stockholm Syndrome is the blurring of reality. The victim begins to see the police, their family, or the outside world as the real threat, the ones who might storm the room and accidentally cause harm. The captor, by contrast, becomes the protective, stable force, the one who understands, the one who is keeping them safe from them. The syndrome extends far beyond a bank vault. We see its echoes in domestic abuse, where a partner systematically isolates their victim, crushes their self-worth, and then steps in with gestures of intense love or apology, reinforcing the belief that the cruelty is an aberration and the abuser is the only safe haven. We see it in cults, where the charismatic leader strips members of their identity and assets only to provide them with a renewed, secure sense of purpose, making them loyal protectors of their own enslavement. The tragedy of Stockholm Syndrome is that the victim becomes the chief warden of their own mental prison. They are not simply being forced to stay, they are psychologically compelled to defend the person who chained them.
Let's talk about the next trick, memory manipulation. You know the feeling. You are 100% certain about an event. You can picture the conversation, the location, the exact words spoken. Yet the person across from you denies it ever happened. Not only do they deny it, but they claim you said something completely different. You replay the scene in your mind, and for a terrifying second, the image begins to flicker. You start to wonder, did I imagine it? Did I confuse the timelines? This is the ground zero of memory manipulation, an insidious psychological trick where one person systematically erodes another person's reliable grip on the past to control their present. It is an attack not just on the truth, but on the archive of your life, making you wholly dependent on the manipulator to confirm what is real. The mechanism works by exploiting a fundamental flaw in human cognition. Memory is not a video recording. It is a reconstruction. Every time we recall an event, we unconsciously edit, fill in gaps, and merge details with subsequent information. The manipulator exploits this malleability through sustained strategic denial and counter-narrative. It often begins small. They deny a forgotten promise. "I never said I'd call you tonight. You must have dreamt that." They deny a small argument. "Why are you bringing up that ridiculous thing from last month? It wasn't an argument. You were just overreacting." The key is consistency. They never waver. They always project absolute certainty while simultaneously introducing doubt about the victim's sanity or competence. "You have such a terrible memory," or "You always twist my words." This constant barrage creates a psychological state known as cognitive dissonance. The victim holds two conflicting beliefs. "I know what I remember is true," and "the person I trust is telling me I am wrong, crazy." To resolve this painful conflict, the brain often defaults to trusting the external source, especially if that source holds relational power. It becomes easier to believe you are flawed than to believe the entire structure of your reality is a lie. This technique is most famously known as gaslighting, named after a 1944 film where a husband subtly manipulates lights and objects, then denies the changes, making his wife believe she is losing her mind. The danger of memory manipulation extends into every sphere of life. In relationships, it locks the victim into a cycle of self-doubt, making them less likely to challenge current abuse because they can't even trust their recollection of past mistreatment. In the workplace, a manipulative colleague might systematically alter the details of a project briefing or a critical meeting, forcing others to rely solely on their summary, thus making them the indispensable gatekeeper of information. The end result is the erosion of self-trust. The victim ceases to rely on their own internal reality and begins to externalize their validation. They look to the manipulator to confirm their own history, their feelings, and their very sanity. They are now completely controlled because the manipulator controls the past, and whoever controls the past controls the future. The only defense against this trick is radical externalization. Document. Write down the conversations, the dates, the specific promises immediately. Seek outside confirmation from unbiased third parties. The moment you are asked, "Are you sure that happened?" or "Are you just remembering it wrong?" the answer must be a steadfast refusal to engage with the doubt. You must reclaim your personal history because memory manipulation is not just about changing the past, it's about stealing the present.
Let's talk about the next trick, fear-mongering. Imagine you are sitting in a meeting. A product launch is imminent, and the atmosphere is tense. Your manager stands up and doesn't talk about strategy or quality control. Instead, they begin with a dire warning. If this launch fails, and I mean if it even stumbles, the CEO is going to clean house. People will lose their jobs. I can't protect everyone. We are one error away from disaster. They then pivot to a specific, tedious task. They say, "I need you to meticulously check every comma on this 50-page document. Your future, our stability, depends on this single proofread." The air in the room changes. The focus shifts from the goal, a successful launch, to a desperate, white-knuckled avoidance of catastrophic loss. They haven't motivated you with inspiration. They've paralyzed you with dread. This is the power of fear-mongering. It is a psychological trick where a speaker or group intentionally uses exaggerated or invented threats to manipulate the emotions and behavior of a target audience. It is not persuasion through logic. It is control through panic. The goal is to bypass the rational mind and create a state of high anxiety that drives immediate, often irrational compliance. The technique works by invoking a primal fight-or-flight response. When the brain perceives an existential threat, the loss of job, health, security, or safety, the prefrontal cortex, the seat of logical thought and long-term planning, effectively shuts down. The limbic system, the center for emotion, takes over. In this panic state, people become highly susceptible to simple, definitive solutions offered by the source of the fear. The manipulator employs specific rhetorical tactics to amplify the threat. First, they use exaggeration and hyperbole. The risk is never just high, it's catastrophic and unprecedented. A mild economic downturn becomes an impending collapse. A competitor's slight advantage becomes an existential threat to the entire industry. Second, they use vagueness and ambiguity. The threat is presented as an unseen, looming presence that could strike anywhere at any time. Who is them? What is the disaster? The lack of specific, verifiable detail makes the threat feel pervasive and unstoppable, feeding the imagination with worst-case scenarios. Third, and most effectively, they present a false dichotomy: the terrifying future versus the manipulator's single, simple solution. They frame themselves as the only necessary protector. We are all in danger, and only I know the way out. We see this used constantly in politics. Campaigns create a narrative of an imminent societal collapse if the opposition party wins, forcing citizens to vote out of defensive terror rather than hopeful vision. The solution is always to consolidate power with the one who named the threat. We see it in marketing. A sales pitch doesn't focus on the product's benefits, but on the terrifying consequences of not owning it: missed social opportunities, health crises, or financial ruin. The insurance industry in particular relies on this, selling peace of mind by first selling the fear of the worst. The ultimate psychological damage of fear-mongering is that it shifts the target audience from a position of agency to a position of helplessness. Instead of working constructively to solve real, manageable problems, people are consumed by fear and react defensively. They stop asking questions, stop exploring alternative solutions, and blindly accept the narrative and demands of the person controlling the threat signal. The only way to counter this trick is to force the transition back to logic. When a terrifying claim is made, the critical response is to demand specificity and verification. What exactly is the threat? What is the evidence? What is the statistical probability?
Let's talk about the next trick: emotional blackmail. You've made a choice for yourself. Maybe it's taking a new job, pursuing a hobby, or simply deciding to spend a Friday night alone. It's a completely reasonable, autonomous decision. Then the phone call comes. Your partner sounds distraught. They say, "I see you're going to that party. I guess my feelings don't matter to you. I really needed you tonight. If you go, I don't know what I'll do. I might just spend the whole night staring at the ceiling, wondering why I'm not enough for you to stay home." The atmosphere instantly curdles. Your reasonable decision transforms into a crushing moral burden. You are no longer choosing a party. You are choosing to inflict pain, anxiety, and potential crisis on someone you care about. The fun of the evening vanishes, replaced by a spike of intense guilt and fear. You cancel your plans. This is the manipulative dance of emotional blackmail. It is a psychological trick where one person threatens to punish the other by inflicting emotional pain, fear, or guilt upon themselves, or by withdrawing affection to get what they want.
It leverages the closeness and care in a relationship, weaponizing the victim's own empathy and loyalty. The core of emotional blackmail is a transactional threat, often hidden behind a veneer of deep feeling. The manipulator communicates a simple, devastating message. If you don't do what I want, I will make you suffer. The tactic is systematized through a specific process, often summarized by the acronym FOG: fear, obligation, and guilt. Fear: the blackmailer uses fear to establish control. They instill the fear of their anger, the fear of abandonment, like, if you leave, I'll never speak to you again, or the fear of their complete emotional collapse. If you do this, I honestly can't guarantee I won't hurt myself. This immediate threat is designed to short-circuit the victim's critical thinking. O. Obligation. The blackmailer subtly or overtly reminds the victim of all the things that they have done for them, creating a sense of profound debt. After all I've sacrificed for you, the least you can do is this one little thing. They frame their current demand as a simple repayment for past kindness, making refusal seem monstrously ungrateful. Guilt. This is the most potent weapon. The blackmailer assigns guilt by making the victim responsible for the blackmailer's own distress. You're making me so anxious right now. This is why I can never be happy. The victim, a caring person, is conditioned to believe that their autonomy, their free choice, is causing suffering, and the only way to alleviate that suffering is immediate capitulation. Emotional blackmail is particularly effective in intimate relationships, family, partners, or close friends, because the victim genuinely cares for the blackmailer's well-being. The blackmailer is exploiting a vulnerability, the victim's love and responsibility. The ultimate damage is the complete erosion of the victim's personal boundaries. The victim learns that any attempt to establish an independent self or any choice that prioritizes their own needs will be met with disproportionate emotional pain and crisis. Over time, they stop making independent choices altogether, preemptively surrendering to the blackmailer's will to avoid the emotional storm. They essentially outsource their decision-making to the person controlling the guilt lever. The countermeasure to emotional blackmail is to recognize that a healthy relationship is built on mutual respect, not mandatory appeasement. It requires an emotionally difficult but essential choice: to tolerate the blackmailer's distress and hold the boundary anyway. You must recognize that their emotional reaction to your healthy choice is their responsibility, not yours. You must accept that you cannot be held emotionally hostage to ensure another person's happiness.
Let's talk about the next trick: playing on insecurities. You walk into a social gathering feeling ready. Maybe you're wearing an outfit you love, or you're prepared to talk about a recent achievement. Then a person you know walks up to you. They don't insult you directly. Instead, they look you up and down and say, "That jacket is a very specific choice. It definitely takes a certain kind of person to pull that off." Or perhaps you're at work, excited about a new project idea. Your colleague leans in and says, "That's ambitious, but you know how the board is. They really only listen to people with a proven track record in finance, not creative types." They haven't attacked your idea or your jacket. They have attacked your self-concept. They've identified a soft spot, a worry that you're not stylish enough or not serious enough, and planted a subtle suggestion that confirms your deepest fear of inadequacy. This is the psychological trick of playing on insecurities. It is a form of manipulation where the abuser identifies a person's known or suspected area of self-doubt, be it intelligence, appearance, wealth, social status, or competence,
and then uses that vulnerability as a continuous lever for control. The aim is to diminish the victim's confidence, making them smaller, less likely to resist, and ultimately more dependent on the manipulator for validation. The mechanism is deeply rooted in emotional mirroring. When the manipulator makes a comment, the victim's internal voice, the insecure critic, immediately amplifies it. The external jab confirms the internal fear, creating a devastating echo chamber. The manipulator doesn't have to convince you of your flaw, they just have to give a voice to the flaw you already believe you possess. This manipulation rarely comes as direct hostility. It is far more effective in the form of the complicit, the backhanded compliment. You're actually really good at this for someone who barely studied in college. Or, I'm amazed you managed to save that much money considering your spending habits. The positive frame makes the comment deniable. If you object, you look ungrateful. But the sting lies in the parenthetical clause, which acts as a psychological tripwire, reminding you of the inadequacy the manipulator wants you to focus on. We see this pervasive pattern in close relationships. In an abusive partnership, one person might systematically criticize the other's friends, social skills, or professional ambition, creating a narrative that the victim is fundamentally ill-equipped for the outside world. The message is clear. You are damaged goods, and only I can tolerate you. This isolation is not physical, it is psychological, built on the concrete of shattered self-esteem. In the workplace, a competitive colleague might use this tactic to hoard power. By constantly, yet subtly, pointing out the limitations of others, their lack of executive presence or political savvy, they ensure the victim second-guesses their every move, clearing the path for the manipulator's own advancement. The lasting damage is the transformation of self-doubt into self-paralysis. The victim becomes tentative, hesitant to take risks, and constantly seeks reassurance from the very person who is undermining them. They enter a state of chronic self-monitoring, terrified of triggering the next critique. The only defense against playing on insecurities is an internal fortress of self-acceptance. You must learn to separate the feeling of inadequacy from the fact of your capability. When a manipulator offers a backhanded compliment, you must refuse to focus on the hand that delivers the insult and instead focus on the firm, internal conviction that your worth is not up for negotiation.
Let's talk about the next trick, triangulation. Imagine you are having an argument with your partner about where to spend the holidays. You state your case calmly, explaining your preference. Before your partner even addresses your point, they turn away, pull out their phone, and text a mutual friend. They then look back at you and say, with a knowing smirk, "Well, Sarah agrees with me. She said your idea is completely impractical. Looks like it's 2 against 1. Suddenly, your private two-person negotiation has exploded into a three-way dynamic. The issue is no longer the holiday plan. It's the fact that a third party, completely absent from the room, has been injected as an authority figure to validate one person and invalidate the other. This is the psychological trick of triangulation. It is a manipulative tactic where one person, the manipulator, introduces a third party, a person, an idea, or an abstract standard, into a two-person dynamic to stabilize their own position, shift the focus, or exert control. Instead of dealing with the primary relationship challenge directly, the manipulator diffuses the conflict and avoids accountability by creating a diversionary triangle. The core function of triangulation is to avoid true intimacy and conflict resolution.
In a healthy two-person interaction, resolving a conflict requires vulnerability, accountability, and compromise. The manipulator, often due to a deep fear of confrontation or a pathological need to control, avoids this head-on work. By introducing a third party, they convert the challenging two-way relationship into three safer yet profoundly dishonest two-way relationships. The tactic is most commonly used in three distinct ways. 1. Using a third party as validation or weapon. As in the holiday example, the manipulator brings in a real or imagined third party to support their argument. They might say, "Everyone at the office thinks you're being unfair," or "My mother always said people who act like that are weak." The third party acts as an external hammer, making the manipulator appear objective and the victim feel isolated and judged by an invisible jury. 2. Playing two people against each other. Divide and conquer. The manipulator shares damaging, often untrue information with person A about person B, and then shares similar negative information with person B about person A. They position themselves as the trusted confidant for both, while secretly fueling mistrust and conflict between the two others. The result is that person A and person B never compare notes and are too busy fighting each other to recognize that the manipulator is the source of the problem, thus keeping the manipulator central and powerful. 3. Using the victim against themselves, the phantom standard. The manipulator introduces an idealized or impossible standard to judge the victim. They constantly compare the victim to an unattainable ideal, an ex-partner who never made a fuss, a perfect colleague who always gets it right, or even an abstract concept like what a real man or woman would do. The third party is a phantom standard, ensuring the victim constantly feels inadequate and strives fruitlessly to please the manipulator. The ultimate psychological impact of triangulation is the loss of relational integrity. The victim loses the ability to trust the direct communication of the manipulator, always fearing that there is a secret counsel or hidden jury judging their every move. They become preoccupied with the invisible dynamics, pouring their energy into managing the relationships with the phantom third parties, rather than addressing the primary issue with the manipulator. To break the triangle, the victim must refuse to acknowledge the third point. When the name Sarah is brought up, the response must be, "This is between you and me. I don't care what Sarah thinks. Let's return to the merits of my idea versus your idea." By insisting on a two-way conversation, the victim dismantles the manipulator's shield and forces them into the difficult but necessary position of accountability. Let's talk about the next trick, public shaming. You are at a company dinner, a celebratory event with colleagues and senior leadership. You feel relaxed, maybe you share a personal story or make a slightly self-deprecating joke. Then your manager, sitting at the head of the table, laughs loudly, a little too loudly. They look around the room, making sure every eye is on you, and say, "That's funny, but sometimes you really do act like that. Remember when you totally botched that presentation last month? We all had to jump in to save it." The laughter in the room instantly dies. A wave of heat rushes over your face, your stomach clenches. You are not at a celebratory dinner anymore. You are on a stage, spotlighted with everyone's silent, uncomfortable judgment focused entirely on you. You try to laugh it off, but the damage is done. For the rest of the evening, you stay quiet, small, and acutely aware of every move you make. This is the deliberate, brutal mechanism of public shaming. It is a psychological tactic where a person or group intentionally exposes or highlights an individual's perceived flaws, errors, or vulnerabilities in a public setting to humiliate them, degrade their status, and force compliance. It is a highly effective, low-effort form of control that works by exploiting one of our most fundamental human needs, the need for social acceptance and belonging. The weapon of public shaming is the group gaze. Humans are social beings. Our survival instinct is wired to prioritize group approval. When a person is shamed publicly, the brain registers it as an immediate threat of social exclusion or expulsion. This fear is more potent than almost any other, leading to a profound, visceral response that bypasses rational thought. The manipulator employs specific techniques to maximize the impact. 1. The violation of context. The shamer waits for a moment of relaxed vulnerability, like a joke, a celebration, or an off-the-record comment, to strike. The shift from a safe, informal atmosphere to one of sudden hostile judgment maximizes the shock and makes the victim feel utterly exposed and betrayed. 2. The use of undeniable truth. The shamer often uses something true, the fact that you made a mistake, the fact that you have a certain insecurity, the fact that you possess a specific vulnerability. They don't lie. They take a small known truth and weaponize it, amplifying it to the point of character assassination. This makes the shaming harder to dispute without looking defensive or guilty. 3. Enforced silence. The audience. The shamer relies entirely on the audience's complicity, not in agreement, but in silence. The awkward, uncomfortable silence or the nervous laughter from others signals to the victim that the group is allowing the shaming to occur, reinforcing their feeling of isolation and powerlessness. The ultimate goal of this manipulation is not just to punish, but to condition future behavior. The victim learns a fast, harsh lesson. Do not speak up. Do not draw attention to yourself. Do not challenge the shamer. The pain of the public exposure ensures that the victim will self-regulate and retreat into silence to avoid the recurrence of that awful, isolating feeling. In workplace settings, it is used to quash dissent. In intimate relationships, it is used to keep one partner perpetually obedient and aware of their inferiority. The profound damage is the internalization of the external judgment. The victim becomes their own worst critic, always hearing the shamer's voice in their ear, leading to a permanent reduction in self-esteem and social confidence. The only way to disarm public shaming is to reclaim ownership of the narrative. By responding calmly, without apology for a past error, and by refusing to allow the shamer to control the focus, the victim can force the audience to judge the cruelty of the shamer's act rather than the original mistake.
Let's talk about the next trick, hoovering. The storm is over. You finally found the courage to end the relationship, or you left the toxic job, or you broke ties with a manipulative family member. You survived the initial pain. You began to heal, and you are starting to see the true peace of a life lived without that constant emotional drain. Then, the message arrives. It's an email at 2 a.m. It doesn't acknowledge the breakup or the toxicity. It simply says, "I saw this article about that writer you love, and it made me think of you. Hope you're doing well." A day later, a flower delivery shows up at your office, sent by them, completely out of the blue. A week later, they call your friend, pretending to check in, only to ask pointed questions about how you're doing. You didn't reach out. You set a boundary. Yet they are back, not demanding, not hostile, but present. They are gently, persistently trying to pull you back into their orbit. This is the psychological trick known as hoovering. Named after the vacuum cleaner brand, hoovering is the manipulative attempt by a person with a toxic or abusive personality, most commonly associated with narcissistic or borderline traits, to suck a former victim back into a relationship or dynamic they previously left. It is triggered by the manipulator's profound fear of abandonment and loss of control, and their need for the supply the victim provided. The key to hoovering is that it is a strategic, often calculated violation of boundaries designed to reestablish the emotional connection without the manipulator ever having to acknowledge the original damage they caused. The tactic works by targeting the victim's natural vulnerability and empathy, bypassing the rational, healed self to access the old emotional wounds. Hoovering takes several strategic forms, moving from subtle to overt. 1. The bait of nostalgia, the gentle hoover. This is the most common form. The manipulator sends a seemingly innocent message about a shared memory, a joke, a favorite song, or a mutual interest. The goal is to remind the victim of the good times and bypass the memory of the trauma, effectively painting a picture of a relationship that was fundamentally loving and safe. 2. The pity play, the crisis hoover. The manipulator fabricates a crisis, an illness, or a dire emotional state to elicit the victim's protective instincts. "I've been so depressed since you left. I haven't been eating." Or, "My car broke down and you were the only person I could call." This leverages the victim's sense of duty and guilt to force them into a caretaking role, which is the exact dynamic of the toxic relationship. 3. The false apology, the redemption hoover. This is often the most dangerous. The manipulator will offer a vague, non-specific apology, such as, "I know I messed up and I'm in therapy now. I just want to make things right." The apology is rarely about a specific abusive act. It's about the general breakup. The aim is to make the victim feel validated and hopeful, drawing them back in before the apology can be tested against real-world behavior. 4. The anger or threat hoover. If the softer tactics fail, the hoovering can turn hostile. The manipulator might threaten to reveal secrets, damage the victim's reputation, or simply barrage them with aggressive messages to invoke the old fear and control the victim through exhaustion and dread. The danger of hoovering is that it invalidates the difficult work of separation. The manipulator makes the victim doubt the necessity of leaving. The only effective defense is to maintain a no-contact boundary. Any engagement, even a simple response to say, "Don't contact me," is treated as a successful reconnection. The silence must be absolute, a solid wall against the emotional vacuum trying to suck you back into the storm.
Let's talk about the next trick: cognitive dissonance. Imagine you are standing in a showroom. You've just paid a massive, life-altering sum of money for a luxury sports car. You spent weeks agonizing over the decision, sacrificing other opportunities, and going deep into debt. You sign the papers, and on the drive home, you realize the car is actually incredibly uncomfortable. The sound system is terrible. It guzzles gas. Now you face two contradictory pieces of information. Belief A: I am a smart, financially responsible person who makes excellent decisions. Belief B: I just spent a fortune on an objectively uncomfortable, gas-guzzling car with a terrible sound system. These two beliefs clash violently in your mind, creating an unbearable psychological tension. This tension is known as cognitive dissonance. It is a state of mental stress or discomfort experienced by an individual who holds two or more contradictory beliefs, ideas, or values simultaneously, or who performs an action that contradicts their beliefs. The human mind is fundamentally motivated to reduce this dissonance, to restore a sense of internal consistency. The easiest way to do this is not to return the car. That would be admitting a massive mistake, but to rationalize the purchase. So, you start the process of dissonance reduction. You tell yourself, the uncomfortable seats are actually a good thing. They make me more alert while driving. The loud engine means it's a real performance car, which is better than any sound system. And the gas consumption, that's just a sign of its raw power, a small price for this level of status. You don't just feel this way, you genuinely believe it. You have changed your reality to match your behavior, rather than changing your behavior to match reality. This innate psychological drive is one of the most powerful tools in a manipulator's arsenal. They don't need to argue with you. They simply need to force you into an action that contradicts a core belief, and your own mind will do the rest of the work to justify the action. The manipulation often begins with the foot in the door technique. The manipulator asks for a small, easily justifiable action that aligns with a core value. For example, a cult leader might ask a new member to donate $5 to a good cause. The person agrees, affirming their belief. I am a generous person. Then the requests escalate. The leader asks for $500. The person now faces dissonance. I am a generous person, belief A, versus giving this much money makes me financially insecure, belief B. To resolve it, the person doesn't pull out. Instead, they rationalize the new action by increasing the value they place on the good cause. They conclude, this cause must be far more important than my financial security. The deeper they go, the more the dissonance compels them to reinforce their commitment to the manipulator's cause. We see this everywhere. In abusive relationships, the victim faces, I am a strong person who deserves respect, belief A, versus I am staying with someone who treats me poorly, belief B. To resolve this, the victim changes belief A to I am a person strong enough to handle this, and if I just try harder to be perfect, the abuse will stop. They minimize the abuse and rationalize the pain as their own fault. In interrogation, police often ask a suspect to admit to a minor, non-crime-related transgression. Once the suspect admits the small fault, I was driving 5 miles over the limit, the dissonance forces the door open for the suspect to rationalize the next larger admission. The defense against cognitive dissonance is radical self-awareness. It requires pausing when you feel that internal tension and asking yourself, am I rationalizing a bad decision to protect my ego? Or is this truly the best course of action? By embracing the momentary painful discomfort of acknowledging a mistake, you prevent your mind from building a permanent self-justifying prison.
Let's talk about the next trick, exploiting mirror neurons. Imagine you are sitting across from someone during an intensely emotional conversation. They lean forward. Their expression is one of deep sorrow, and they begin to tell a story about a recent setback. As they speak, you feel a tightening in your chest. Your brow subtly furrows, and you might even feel a sting behind your own eyes. You are not sad because your life is difficult. You are sad because you are perfectly mirroring their distress. This spontaneous, often subconscious synchronization of emotion and body language is the result of your mirror neurons at work. Mirror neurons are a class of neurons in the brain that fire both when an individual performs an action and when the individual observes another performing that same action. They are the neurobiological basis for empathy, imitation, and social learning. They allow us to literally try on another person's experience as if it were our own. The psychological trick of exploiting mirror neurons is a subtle, high-impact form of manipulation where a person intentionally and skillfully projects a specific emotional or physical state to induce the corresponding state in the target, thereby controlling the emotional atmosphere and the target's reaction. The manipulator bypasses language and logic, hitting the target's emotional core directly. The tactic is effective because it works below the level of consciousness. The target is not consciously deciding to feel sad or anxious. Their brain is automatically simulating the manipulator's projected state. Manipulators use this technique in several ways. 1. The projection of calm and authority. When a manipulator wants compliance, they will often project an unshakable, authoritative calm, regardless of the situation. In a crisis, if a leader or manager projects deep, quiet control, the mirror neurons of the team fire to match. The team members then feel a sense of quiet control, making them less likely to panic or question the manipulator's decisions.
The calmness acts as an infectious signal of competence. 2. The manufacturing of empathy and pity, the sadness contagion. When the manipulator wants forgiveness or a favor, they will project extreme vulnerability, sorrow, or fatigue. They will use slow, labored speech, slump their shoulders, and make prolonged eye contact with a look of deep distress. The target's mirror neurons fire, inducing genuine feelings of sympathy, pity, and obligation. This makes it almost impossible for the target to say no or to hold a firm boundary without feeling like a heartless brute. 3. Inducing anxiety and urgency, the stress bomb. To rush a decision or prevent critical thought, the manipulator will project frantic, nervous energy, rapid speech, shallow breathing. The target quickly mirrors this physiological state, experiencing the same feelings of stress and urgency. In this heightened emotional state, they are far more likely to agree to the manipulator's terms just to make the uncomfortable, anxious energy stop. The critical danger of this trick is that it makes the manipulator's feelings contagious and often mistaken for your own. You believe the anxiety or sorrow you feel is a true reaction to the situation, when it is in fact a simulated reaction to the manipulator's performance. This leads to profound self-doubt, where you constantly feel overwhelmed or overly emotional in their presence. The defense is to develop emotional distance. You must recognize the difference between your authentic emotional state and the state you are mirroring. When a strong feeling of emotion hits you in their presence, pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, is this feeling mine, or is it merely a reflection of the person across from me? By engaging your rational mind, you break the unconscious loop of the mirror neuron system, allowing you to react to the facts, not the performance.
Let's talk about the next trick, exploiting empathy. Imagine a scenario where a colleague consistently misses deadlines, causing stress for the entire team. Finally, you confront them, planning to outline a clear, firm boundary for future work. Before you can get the full sentence out, they burst into tears. They don't apologize for the deadlines. Instead, they launch into a detailed, tearful account of their recent personal struggles, a difficult family situation, a minor health worry, a sudden financial strain. You stop talking about the deadlines. Your firmness dissolves. You find yourself comforting them, offering to pick up the slack and suddenly feeling guilty for having added more pressure to their life. You walked in to set a boundary. You walked out having volunteered to do their job for them. This is the potent, subtle manipulation of exploiting empathy. It is a psychological trick where a manipulator deliberately leverages another person's capacity for kindness, compassion, and guilt to control their actions, secure favors, or avoid accountability. It takes the most noble human trait, the ability to feel for another, and weaponizes it, turning the victim's own moral compass against them. The mechanism is effective because the victim, being an empathetic person, experiences an intense form of guilt-driven obligation. They feel responsible for alleviating the manipulator's pain. The manipulator ensures that any attempt by the victim to assert a boundary, to say no, to take space, or to ask for accountability is immediately met with a devastating display of distress that communicates, "Your needs are causing me pain." The victim's inner monologue then shifts from, "I need to set this boundary," to, "I cannot possibly inflict more suffering on this person." The need to alleviate the immediate distress overrides the long-term need for self-care and boundary maintenance. Exploiting empathy is the primary engine of a parasitic relationship. We see it in the needy friend. They constantly call with manufactured crises, demanding immediate attention and support, but they are completely unavailable when you need them. Your exhaustion is dismissed. Their need is presented as an emergency. The perpetual victim partner.
They use their past trauma or current stress as a blanket excuse for every irresponsible or abusive action. Holding them accountable is framed as kicking them when they're down. The manipulator does not seek a true mutual emotional exchange. They seek sympathy supply. They want the victim's emotional energy, time, and resources without ever having to reciprocate. If the victim stops giving, the distress display intensifies, sometimes leading to threats of self-harm, which is the ultimate, most severe form of exploiting empathy. The deep psychological damage is that the victim learns to associate their own self-respect with cruelty. Setting a healthy boundary feels like a mean act because it causes visible distress in the manipulator. Over time, the victim loses the ability to distinguish between genuine, healthy compassion and the debilitating, self-sacrificing guilt that the manipulator has conditioned them to feel. The only defense against this insidious trick is to recognize that empathy is a resource that must be guarded. You must mentally separate the person's feelings from the person's behavior. You can feel deep compassion for a person's struggles while simultaneously holding them accountable for their actions and protecting your own boundaries. You are not responsible for another adult's emotional regulation. You are only responsible for your own kind and honest response. Let's talk about the next trick, creating a sense of obligation. Imagine you're having dinner with a new acquaintance. Throughout the evening, they are incredibly generous. They insist on paying for the whole meal, even a round of expensive drinks, brushing off your attempts to split the bill. The next week, they offer you an unsolicited, thoughtful gift, a book they know you've been looking for. They seem genuinely kind, selfless, and dedicated to making your life better. A few days later, they call. They don't just want to chat. They launch into a long, involved story about a major favor they need, one that is difficult, costly, and will take up a significant amount of your time. They don't ask outright, but their final statement is laced with expectation. Well, I know you're the only person I can trust with this. Given all we've shared, I hope I can count on you. The request feels heavy, almost impossible to refuse. Why? Because they have successfully executed the psychological trick of creating a sense of obligation. This tactic is a powerful form of manipulation, where one person systematically invests resources, time, money, favors, compliments, or gifts into another person, not out of genuine altruism, but with the calculated goal of generating an unearned, unstated social debt that can be called in later. The mechanism exploits a fundamental principle of human society, the rule of reciprocity. This deeply ingrained social norm states that we feel compelled to repay what another person has provided us. When someone gives us a gift or a favor, we feel a powerful, often uncomfortable sense of imbalance until we have settled the score. The manipulator, by giving disproportionately, intentionally creates this imbalance. The trick is effective because it forces the victim into a state of psychological debt. The initial favors and gifts are strategically chosen to be 1. Unsolicited. The victim didn't ask for the expensive meal or the gift. This prevents them from negotiating the terms of the exchange and makes the giving appear purely altruistic. 2. Disproportionate. The value of the initial giving is small and easily dispensed by the manipulator, but the requested favor is large, difficult, or costly for the victim. This maximizes the return on investment. The key to the manipulation is the invisible ledger. The manipulator acts as if they are giving freely, never mentioning a future demand. This means the victim never consciously agrees to the trade. When the inevitable request comes, it is prefaced not by a direct demand, but by a subtle, emotionally laden reference to the past generosity. After everything I've done for you, or I wouldn't ask this if I hadn't already put myself out for you. The victim faces intense emotional pressure. To refuse the difficult request would mean A. violating the deep-seated rule of reciprocity, and B, appearing ungrateful, selfish, or cold, thus contradicting the new, kind identity the manipulator has helped build around them. The victim chooses to endure the difficult favor to avoid the instantaneous, crushing moral discomfort of appearing ungrateful. They sacrifice their boundaries in time to clear the invisible debt. This trick is rampant in cults, sales, and toxic family dynamics. The cult leader provides a deep sense of belonging and purpose, generating an immense psychological debt that is later called in for financial sacrifices or total loyalty. The defense against this trick is to recognize the true cost of an unsolicited favor. You must immediately decline or repay any large unearned gift or favor before the obligation can be created. By politely insisting on splitting the bill or immediately offering a reciprocal gift, you clear the ledger. You must acknowledge that genuine generosity is free of expectation, and anything presented with an invisible string is not a gift, but a down payment on your future compliance.
Let's talk about the next trick: divide and conquer tactics. Imagine you are a member of a small, highly effective team at work. Everyone gets along, and the group often challenges management with unified, well-reasoned proposals. Your manager, who resents this shared power, starts a new approach. First, they single out the most outspoken team member, offering them a small, highly public promotion, a new title but no real change in duties. The manager then pulls a second, quieter team member aside and confides, "You know, the team leader has been complaining to me that you're not pulling your weight. I'm just telling you this so you can improve." They then tell the first team member that the second one is secretly undermining their new title. The result is immediate and chaotic. The outspoken member now operates with a sense of superiority, isolating themselves. The quieter member feels attacked and suspicious, withdrawing from the group. Communication breaks down. Unity shatters. The well-reasoned proposals stop. The manager, having done nothing but plant a few seeds of discord, now rules over a fragmented, powerless group. This is the timeless psychological trick of divide and conquer tactics. Also known as divide et impera, this strategy is used by a person or ruling party to break a larger concentration of power into smaller, more easily manageable, and less threatening pieces. The manipulator's ultimate goal is to maintain or gain control by ensuring that the potential opposition never unites to challenge them. The tactic works by exploiting the natural human tendencies toward insecurity, suspicion, and self-interest. The manipulator does not fight the group, they make the group fight itself, transforming a source of strength, unity, into a source of weakness, internal conflict. The successful execution of divide and conquer involves 3 calculated steps. 1. Create distinctions. The manipulator must first introduce a superficial basis for difference within the group where none existed before. This can be based on age, tenure, background, title, or any arbitrary metric. They might invent a new elite tier of employees, or bestow preferential treatment on one family member over the others. The goal is to draw new, firm lines of identity. 2. Sow mistrust, the strategic lie. The manipulator then uses triangulation to inject suspicion. They feed confidential, often false or exaggerated information to each faction about the other. They whisper to Group A that Group B is plotting against them, and vice versa. They are careful to always position themselves as the trusted, honest source of this critical intelligence.
The mistrust becomes so profound that the two groups stop sharing genuine information and start believing the manipulator's narrative. 3. Reward fragmentation. The manipulator provides small, disproportionate rewards to individuals who demonstrate loyalty and antagonism towards their former peers. When one person breaks ranks and informs on the others, they are momentarily elevated. This reinforces the idea that self-interest and division are rewarded, while unity and cooperation are punished. The pursuit of individual favor replaces the pursuit of the collective good. We see this tactic in every realm of society. In toxic family dynamics, a parent might constantly pit siblings against each other for approval, ensuring that no two siblings can ever band together to challenge the parent's authority. In politics, leaders exploit existing societal divisions, racial, class, or religious, to turn public focus onto internal struggles, distracting from the central power holder. The profound damage of divide and conquer is the destruction of social trust. Once trust is lost, a group's capacity for collective action, for resistance, innovation, or democratic challenge is permanently crippled. The victims cease to see the external manipulator as the enemy. They see their former allies as the threat. The only way to break the pattern is through a deliberate, radical commitment to unite and verify. The moment suspicion arises, individuals must be willing to bypass the manipulator and directly verify all information with the person they are supposedly feuding with. By choosing open communication over the manipulator's whisper campaign, the group can force the lines of the triangle to straighten, exposing the manipulator at the apex.
Let's talk about the next trick: authority bias. Imagine a bustling emergency room. A nurse receives a phone call from a doctor she has never met, who introduces himself by his title and demands she immediately administer a new, untested drug at 4 times the maximum recommended dosage. The order is clearly unsafe, potentially lethal, and violates multiple hospital protocols, including the rule against taking phone orders for medication. Yet, in a well-documented real-life example of this very situation, 95% of the nurses complied, or attempted to comply with the order. They paused their critical thinking, suspended their safety training, and prepared to administer the drug simply because the voice on the other end of the line was cloaked in the immutable power of a single word: doctor. This is the blinding psychological trick of authority bias. Authority bias is the tendency to attribute greater accuracy to the opinion of an authority figure, regardless of the content of the opinion, and to be more influenced by that opinion. In essence, our brains are hardwired to believe that a person in a position of perceived power, expertise, or status knows better than we do, and that following their commands will lead to a better outcome or, crucially, avoid negative consequences. The tactic is effective because it exploits our deepest social programming. From childhood, we are conditioned to obey parents, teachers, and police. Obedience is often directly linked to safety and reward. When confronted with an authority figure, the brain takes a cognitive shortcut. It switches from critical evaluation to compliant execution. The manipulator doesn't need to be genuinely authoritative. They only need to wear the trappings of authority. This often involves 3 key elements. Number 1, symbols of status. These include titles, doctor, CEO, commander, uniforms, lab coats, official badges, and props, expensive cars, corner offices. These symbols act as potent visual cues that trigger the authority bias reflex before a single word is spoken. The doctor in the hospital example relied entirely on the perceived authority of the medical title. Number 2, confident assertion. This is the tone. Authority figures rarely ask, they state, often with a tone of unwavering, non-negotiable certainty. This confidence is contagious, silencing the doubts of subordinates. When a manipulator speaks in a loud, decisive, and impatient manner, it mirrors the expected communication style of a high-status individual, compelling others to assume the information must be correct. And 3, the promise of consequence. The authority figure always holds the power to reward or punish. The fear of incurring the displeasure of this figure, the fear of a bad performance review, social humiliation, or professional reprisal is often the greater motivator than the fear of making a mistake on the job. Obedience is therefore a survival strategy. The most famous demonstration of this effect is the Milgram experiment, where subjects were willing to administer increasingly painful electric shocks to an innocent person simply because a man in a lab coat told them to continue. The danger of authority bias is that it blinds us to ethical and logical violations. It allows an entire group to follow a bad or harmful order, rationalizing the action by shifting all moral responsibility onto the person in charge. I was just following orders. The power of personal accountability is outsourced to the authority figure. The defense against this trick is to develop a strong challenge reflex. When an order is given that feels wrong, the immediate response must be to stop and require full justification. You must mentally strip the manipulator of their symbols of status and demand to evaluate the merits of the argument and the ethics of the command rather than simply the power of the source.
Let's talk about the next trick, scapegoating. Imagine a company has just experienced a massive failure. A product launch flopped, a lawsuit was filed, or they missed their quarterly revenue target by a mile. The atmosphere is tense, and the blame is diffuse, spread across poor planning, bad market timing, and multiple managerial errors. The CEO calls a company-wide meeting. Instead of taking responsibility, they point a finger at a single mid-level employee, the head of quality assurance. The CEO announces, with theatrical fury, that this individual was solely responsible. They missed the key testing phase, they ignored the red flags, they were incompetent. The CEO fires the person publicly, declaring, "The problem has been identified and removed. Now we can all move forward." A collective sigh of relief sweeps the room. The executives are safe, the middle managers are safe. The complex, terrifying problem of organizational failure has been reduced to a simple, singular human error. The system is still sound, only one person was broken. This is the psychological trick of scapegoating. Scapegoating is the act of singling out a person or group for unmerited blame and negative treatment, forcing them to carry the sins, failures, or frustrations of a larger group or system. The tactic is a powerful deflection and psychological pressure release valve, transforming diffuse anxiety into directed hostility. The mechanism is rooted in our need for cognitive closure. The human mind finds uncertainty and complex blame deeply distressing. Scapegoating offers an immediate, emotionally satisfying answer to a complicated problem. By isolating a single person as the source of all failure, the group is instantly freed from its own responsibility, guilt, and the hard work of systematic correction. The successful execution of scapegoating relies on 3 strategic steps. 1. Identification of the other. The chosen scapegoat is rarely the most powerful person. They are often someone who is already marginalized, vulnerable, or slightly different from the core group. This makes them easier to isolate and ensures they lack the power structure to fight back effectively. They are an outsider, even if they have been an integral part of the group. 2. Amplification of flaw. The manipulator takes a small, real flaw or error made by the scapegoat and magnifies it into an all-encompassing character trait. The QA head who missed one test becomes a symbol of systemic incompetence. The group uses projection, offloading its collective anxieties and failures onto this single individual, turning them into a symbolic container for all the group's negativity. 3. Ritualistic exclusion. The scapegoat is subjected to a public, ritualistic form of punishment, whether it's termination, social ostracization, or public shaming. This exclusion serves a dual purpose. It momentarily unites the rest of the group through a shared sense of righteous indignation. We are good because they are bad. And it provides the emotional catharsis necessary for the group to feel purified and ready to move forward. The historical and societal danger of scapegoating is its ability to fuel prejudice and mass violence. Throughout history, entire ethnic or religious groups have been cast as scapegoats for economic downturns, social unrest, or plagues. By externalizing the cause of their suffering, a populace avoids introspecting on their own social or political failings. The psychological damage to the individual scapegoat is catastrophic, leading to deep trauma, loss of identity, and pervasive self-doubt. The damage to the group, however, is the failure of real learning. By punishing a symptom, the scapegoat, instead of the disease, the systemic failure, the group virtually guarantees that the original problem will reoccur. The defense against this trick is to always insist on a systemic analysis of failure. When the finger is pointed at one person, the critical response must be, how did this system allow this to happen? By refusing to accept the easy answer of singular human fault, the group can defend the individual and force the painful but necessary work of self-correction.
Let's talk about the next trick, Groupthink Induction. Imagine you are in a high-stakes meeting with a small team. The team leader proposes an idea that, in your professional judgment, is fundamentally flawed and likely to lead to disaster. You start to formulate your counter-argument, but you hesitate. The person next to you nods enthusiastically, saying, "That's a brilliant strategy, absolutely the right direction." The person across the table smiles and chimes in, "I totally agree, it's exactly what we need." The leader then looks directly at you, saying, "So, we have consensus. Any objections?" You look around the room. Every face reflects assurance, confidence, and collective agreement. You feel a sudden, crushing pressure. To speak up now would be to disrupt the harmony, to challenge the collective intelligence, and to risk being labeled as the lone dissenter, the person who doesn't understand, or worse, who is deliberately trying to sabotage the group. You swallow your argument and say, "No objections. It sounds great." This is the catastrophic phenomenon of groupthink induction. Groupthink is a psychological phenomenon that occurs within a small, tight-knit group where the desire for conformity and harmony results in an irrational or dysfunctional decision-making outcome. The psychological trick is the intentional creation of an environment where disagreement is perceived as a threat to the group's cohesion, forcing individuals to self-censor and suspend critical judgment. The tactic is effective because it exploits the profound human need for inclusion and belonging. Humans derive psychological safety from being part of a group, and the fear of social exclusion is a powerful motivator. The manipulator, often the leader, leverages this fear to ensure their preferred outcome is never challenged. The induction of groupthink relies on fostering three destructive symptoms within the group. 1. Illusion of invulnerability and morality. The group develops an inflated sense of its own wisdom and ethical correctness, believing its decisions are inherently flawless and morally superior. This makes external criticism easy to dismiss and internal dissent seem treasonous. The leader reinforces this by consistently framing the group as the best and the brightest. 2. Rationalization and stereotyping. Any warning signs, negative data, or dissenting opinions from outside the group are collectively rationalized away or stereotyped as the ignorant complaints of the competition, the naive public, or the jealous outsiders.
This ensures the group's bubble remains intact and their certainty is absolute. 3. Direct pressure and self-censorship. This is the most crucial step. The leader applies direct pressure on any perceived dissenter, often through subtle mockery or immediate dismissal. This quickly teaches individuals the price of disagreement. The individuals then begin to self-censor, holding back their true thoughts and doubts to preserve the team spirit. This leads to the illusion of unanimity, where everyone believes the consensus is real because no one has heard the voices of doubt, including their own, spoken aloud. The historical examples of groupthink are tragic, famously cited in the analysis of the Bay of Pigs invasion, where President Kennedy's advisors self-censored their concerns, and the Challenger space shuttle disaster, where engineers' warnings were systematically dismissed. The profound danger of groupthink is the elimination of the most crucial element of high-stakes decision-making, constructive conflict. By prioritizing harmony over truth, the group not only makes flawed decisions, but loses the capacity to learn from its errors, because admitting a mistake would shatter the illusion of invulnerability. The defense against this trick is to formalize and celebrate dissent. The moment you feel the pressure to agree, you must invoke the devil's advocate role. A healthy group or a critical individual must insist on protocols that require anonymity for dissent, or assign a rotating member to be the formal critic. By making disagreement an expected functional part of the process, you remove the social penalty for speaking the truth and dismantle the manipulator's grip on the collective mind.
Let's talk about the next trick, cultivating false identity. You meet a new person, and they are instantly, impossibly affirming. They tell you things you've always wanted to hear about yourself. You are the most deeply sensitive person I have ever met. Or, your creative vision is totally misunderstood by others. You are a genius. They don't just compliment you, they give you a ready-made, spectacular identity. You quickly fall into this role. You start dressing the part of the misunderstood genius, adopting their vocabulary and focusing only on the traits they praise. You feel seen, validated, and powerful. But then the validation becomes conditional. The manipulator gently reminds you, if you start spending time with those other friends, you might lose that sensitivity. They just don't get the real you that I see. Or, don't take that practical job. Your genius will be wasted. You must stay here, focused on your art, where I can protect your vision. Slowly, you realize that the identity, the wonderful, affirmed self, is a delicate artifact held together by the manipulator's approval. The moment you deviate from the script, the identity is threatened, and your self-worth vanishes. This is the manipulative trick of cultivating false identity. It is a subtle yet powerful form of control where the manipulator fabricates an appealing, idealized persona for the victim and then makes the victim's access to that persona entirely dependent upon the manipulator's continued presence and approval. The goal is to bind the victim not with chains, but with a highly desirable but wholly manufactured self-image. The tactic works by exploiting a deep, universal human vulnerability, the search for self-worth and meaning. Many people carry internal insecurities about who they are or what their purpose is. The manipulator steps into this void and provides an instant, perfect answer, an identity that feels like a destiny fulfilled. The process involves two crucial, interwoven phases. Phase 1. Idealization, the golden mirror. The manipulator uses a technique known as love bombing to quickly build the identity. They shower the victim with hyperbolic praise, affirming their deepest, secret hopes for themselves. The victim is told they are unique, special, and the only person who ever understood me. This is highly addictive. The victim feels a profound sense of recognition and falls in love not just with the manipulator, but with the amazing person the manipulator sees them as.
Phase 2. Conditional approval. The identity trap. Once the false identity is internalized, the manipulator begins to attach strings to it. They subtly or overtly set behavioral parameters that are necessary to maintain the special status. To be the genius, you must rely only on my artistic feedback. To be the sensitive soul, you must isolate yourself from anyone I deem too crude. Any independent action by the victim is framed as a betrayal of their true self, which only the manipulator truly understands. The psychological consequence is the creation of a self-esteem loop. The victim's self-esteem is no longer internally regulated. It is completely outsourced to the manipulator. The true, authentic self, the one with flaws, complexities, and independent desires, is rejected in favor of the perfect yet fragile, fabricated persona. The victim is terrified of losing the identity, which means they are terrified of losing the manipulator. We see this most vividly in cults and in toxic, emotionally dependent relationships. The cult leader gives the member a new, purified identity, but only on the condition of total, unquestioning obedience. The defense against this profound trick is to reject the instant, perfect answer. You must recognize that true self-worth is messy, complex, and built slowly through authentic struggle and failure independent of external praise. The critical task is to break the dependency by reclaiming the flawed, imperfect self. If someone offers you a ready-made golden identity, you must be willing to let go of the idealization and embrace the terrifying but ultimately liberating work of defining your own complex whole person.
Let's talk about the next trick, the seeds of self-doubt. You are at a professional presentation. You deliver your material flawlessly. As you are packing up, a colleague walks over, smiling. They don't criticize the content. They don't attack your delivery. They simply lean in and say, "That was really interesting. I wonder, though, did you notice how confused Sarah looked in the front row? I mean, she's usually sharp. It just makes you think, you know?" They walk away, leaving you frozen. The compliment, "really interesting," is instantly nullified. Your mind latches on to the ambiguous peripheral detail, Sarah's confused face. You spend the rest of the afternoon replaying the presentation, no longer focused on the facts, but on the potential for misinterpretation. You begin to question your ability to communicate clearly. Did you truly fail to connect with the audience? This is the subtle, corrosive trick of planting the seeds of self-doubt. It is a form of manipulation where the abuser uses ambiguous, unverifiable, or peripheral commentary to undermine a person's confidence in their own perceptions, judgments, or abilities. Unlike direct criticism, which can be refuted, this trick uses insinuation and suggestion to trigger the victim's internal insecurities, allowing the victim's own mind to do the work of the undermining. The mechanism works by exploiting the mind's tendency toward closure and internalization. When a direct statement is made, the mind can analyze and defend against it. But when an ambiguous suggestion is planted, "I wonder if Sarah looked confused," the mind is compelled to seek closure by filling in the blank, almost always defaulting to the worst-case scenario. The victim internalizes the suggestion, transforming an external comment into a core self-critical belief. "I must not be clear enough." The manipulator utilizes several key techniques. 1. The ambiguous insinuation, the wonder. The manipulator never makes a direct accusation. They use phrases like, "I just wonder," "it seems like," or "did you notice?" They present a subjective interpretation as an objective observation, placing the burden of verification on the victim.
The victim knows they can't ask Sarah, "Were you confused?" without looking paranoid, leaving the doubt to fester. The peripheral attack, the flaw in the gaze. The manipulator targets a third party's reaction to the victim rather than themselves. "Your mother looked so tired when you spoke to her," or "the client seemed slightly dismissive of your proposal." This is harder to defend against because the victim's own actions are not the direct target. The supposed negative effect of their actions is the confirmation of pre-existing fear. This trick is most effective when it aligns with an existing insecurity. If the victim already worries they are not a good communicator, the insinuation about Sarah's confusion is devastating. The manipulator knows the soft spots and expertly guides the victim's internal dialogue to these areas of vulnerability. The result is a state of chronic self-monitoring. The victim becomes hyper-vigilant, constantly checking their own behavior for flaws, anxiously anticipating the next ambiguous critique. They stop trusting their own internal read on a situation. This leads to paralysis, hesitancy, and a reduced capacity for taking initiative. The profound damage of the seeds of self-doubt is that it is a process of autonomic disarmament. The victim's most potent weapon, the ability to trust their own perspective, is turned against them. They become their own worst critic and most effective saboteur. The defense against this trick is to insist on clarity and fact. When the manipulator uses an ambiguous statement, the victim must respond by demanding a concrete claim. "What exactly did you observe that made you think that?" By forcing the manipulator to drop the insinuation and make a specific, verifiable statement, the victim drags the trick out of the shadows of suggestion into the light of accountability, where it rarely survives. Let's talk about the next trick: emotional contagious exploitation. Imagine walking into your home after a long, stressful day. Before you even close the door, your partner sighs dramatically. Their shoulders slump, and they launch into a rapid-fire monologue of every minor frustration they've endured. The traffic was awful. The coffee machine broke. A colleague was irritating. Their tone is frantic, their pace is chaotic, and their entire posture screams stress and panic. Within minutes, your own shoulders tense up, your head starts to throb. The calm you built on your commute is gone, replaced by a sudden, intense feeling of anxiety and overwhelm that doesn't actually belong to you. You feel agitated and emotionally exhausted, mirroring the chaos they just projected. You ask, "What can I do?" already primed to solve a crisis you didn't create. This is the potent nonverbal tactic of emotional contagious exploitation. This trick leverages the neuroscientific reality of emotional contagion, the phenomenon where one person's emotions and related behaviors, moods, expressions, physiological states, are automatically and often unconsciously caught by another person. The manipulator weaponizes this natural human tendency, intentionally projecting a specific high-intensity emotion to infect the target and control the emotional environment and subsequent behavior. The foundation of this exploitation is the mirror neuron system, as previously discussed, but the focus here is on the emotional spread. The manipulator uses their body language, facial expressions, and tone of voice as a potent vector for emotional disease. They don't need to argue a point, they simply need to make you feel the way they want you to act. The manipulator employs this technique to achieve a specific outcome. 1. Contagion of crisis. The anxiety bomb. By projecting frantic stress, the manipulator induces a mirror state of anxiety in the victim. In this stress state, the victim's critical thinking is reduced, making them desperate for immediate relief. The manipulator then offers the solution, which is always something that benefits them. "I need you to drop everything and handle this," or "You need to agree to my plan right now." The victim complies not because the plan is good, but to stop the agonizing feeling of mirrored panic. 2. Contagion of pity, the sorrow trap. When the manipulator wants to avoid accountability or elicit favors, they project profound theatrical sadness, helplessness, or self-pity. They use slumped posture, slow movement, and a doleful tone. The victim catches the sadness, generating genuine sympathy and guilt. The victim's action is then driven by the compulsive urge to alleviate their own mirrored sadness by comforting and acquiescing to the manipulator. 3. Contagion of fury, the intimidation pulse. In a confrontation, the manipulator will project sudden, disproportionate rage. Their face hardens, their voice raises, and their movements become sharp. The victim's brain, mirroring this primal display, is flooded with fear hormones. The instinct is no longer to stand firm, but to retreat, apologize, and appease the source of the overwhelming emotional heat. The danger of this trick is the complete loss of emotional sovereignty. The victim begins to believe that the perpetual state of anxiety, guilt, or chaos they feel is their own natural state, when in reality, it is a constant infection from the manipulator. They become emotionally exhausted and perpetually focused on managing the manipulator's mood to maintain their own fleeting peace. The defense is to develop a strong emotional shield and a physical decoupling. When you are hit with an overwhelming, seemingly foreign emotion, the immediate action must be physical. Change your posture, slow your breathing, and consciously force a neutral or calm expression. By decoupling your physical response from their projected emotion, you stop the mirror neurons from firing, break the cycle of contagion, and reclaim your personal emotional state.
Let's talk about the next trick, the illusion of choice. You are a teenager being told by your parents that you need to find a way to earn money this summer. You are internally resisting, wanting to spend your time relaxing. Then your father sits you down and says, "Look, you have two options for the summer. You can either work for your uncle at the construction site, which pays $15 an hour, or you can work the 6 a.m. shift stocking shelves at the local supermarket for $10 an hour. It's up to you. Which one do you choose?" You pause. You don't want either job, but you instantly start analyzing the two options presented, $15 versus $10. Construction is hot, but the pay is better. Supermarket is early, but maybe less physically demanding. You spend 10 minutes weighing the pros and cons, completely absorbed in the decision. Finally, you choose the construction job, feeling a sense of control and self-determination. You walk away thinking, "I chose this job. I made a tough decision." What you failed to realize is that the core decision, working, was never on the table. The only choice was between option A and option B, both pre-approved by the manipulator. This is the psychological trick of the illusion of choice. It is a powerful form of manipulation where the manipulator presents the victim with a set of predetermined options, all of which lead to the manipulator's desired outcome. By focusing the victim's attention on the minor choice between the options, the manipulator successfully hides the larger, more fundamental choice that has already been eliminated, the choice to reject the entire premise. The tactic works by exploiting the mind's deep-seated need for autonomy and control. When a person feels they have made a decision, they feel a sense of ownership over the outcome and are less likely to resist or resent the resulting action. The manipulator capitalizes on this by offering a trivial choice, which is enough to satisfy the psychological need for control, but insufficient to change the final result. The core structure of the illusion is the forced dichotomy. Choice A leads to the manipulator's desired outcome. Choice B also leads to the manipulator's desired outcome, but is often slightly less appealing to serve as a foil. Choice C, the hidden option, the choice to not participate, which is subtly or overtly removed from the decision set.
We see this tactic used everywhere, from subtle sales techniques to complex political maneuvers. In sales, a salesperson doesn't ask, "Are you buying the car?" They ask, "Do you want the silver car or the black car?" The victim's mind immediately shifts to color preference, bypassing the fundamental question of purchase commitment. In parenting or leadership, a manager doesn't ask, "Will you finish the report?" They ask, "Will you have the report finished by 3 p.m. or 5 p.m.?" By presenting the timeline options, the manager secures the primary goal, completion, while giving the employee a satisfying but ultimately controlled sense of scheduling power. In abusive dynamics, a manipulative partner doesn't ask, "Will you go out with your friends?" They ask, "Will you stay in tonight and watch my favorite movie, or will you stay in and order takeout with me?" By framing the options as equally valid ways to spend time with them, the partner successfully eliminates the victim's independent choice to leave the house. The psychological damage is the erosion of true agency. The victim is perpetually operating within a cage defined by the manipulator. They become highly skilled at optimizing within the limited options, but lose the capacity to question the boundaries of the cage itself. The only defense against the illusion of choice is to reject the premise entirely. When presented with two unacceptable options, the critical response is to identify and articulate the hidden, fundamental option. "Thank you for the options, but my choice is option C. I am not working this summer." By dragging the hidden option into the open, you force the manipulator to confront your true autonomy.
Let's talk about the next trick, anchoring effect. Imagine you walk into a store to buy a new suit. The first suit a salesperson shows you is an opulent, custom-tailored masterpiece. The price tag is displayed prominently, $5,000. You immediately scoff. That is far more than you are willing to spend. The salesperson nods sympathetically and says, "I understand. That one is purely aspirational. Let me show you something more practical." They then bring out a second suit, which is of good quality, perfectly adequate, and carries a price tag of $1,200. You look at the $1,200 suit, and your mind doesn't register it as expensive. It registers it as a massive discount, a full $3,800 cheaper than the first one. That initial $5,000 price tag, though completely irrelevant to the actual purchase, has psychologically dragged down your entire price perception. You walk away with the $1,200 suit feeling like a savvy negotiator who got a great deal. This is the potent invisible influence of the anchoring effect. Anchoring is a cognitive bias where an individual depends too heavily on the first piece of information offered, the anchor, when making decisions. Subsequent judgments, estimates, or negotiations are unconsciously adjusted toward that initial figure, even if the figure is arbitrary, irrelevant, or even obviously extreme. The psychological trick of anchoring exploitation is the deliberate introduction of a high or low number, the anchor, at the beginning of a negotiation or decision-making process to artificially pull the final result toward the manipulator's desired range. The manipulator knows that once the anchor is set, the victim's rational mind will struggle to escape its orbit. The tactic works by exploiting the mind's tendency to use relative judgment. We rarely evaluate things in a vacuum. Instead, we evaluate value, price, and quality in relation to what is immediately available. The manipulator ensures the anchor is the first thing available. The successful exploitation of anchoring occurs in several settings. 1. The extreme anchor, the highball. This is the suit example. In salary negotiations, a savvy candidate will deliberately start with a high, often slightly ambitious salary demand. The company may never offer that number, but the initial figure sets the entire negotiation range higher. The final, slightly lower offer feels like a win for both sides, but the company has still paid more than they originally intended. 2. The arbitrary anchor, the irrelevant number.
research has shown that even a completely random number can act as an anchor. In one study, people asked to estimate the number of countries in Africa were heavily influenced by a completely random number they were asked to write down moments before. The manipulator can use any available number, a date, an irrelevant sales figure, or even their shoe size to create an unconscious drag on the final estimate. 3. The low anchor, the bait and switch. A manipulator can also use a low anchor. A salesperson advertises a service for an incredibly low price. Once the customer is mentally committed, the salesperson immediately reveals the actual product, a much more expensive one. The customer is anchored to the idea of the original low cost, making them highly susceptible to the salesperson's claim that the higher price is still a bargain. The danger of anchoring is the illusion of rationality. The victim feels they have used their intellect to adjust and negotiate, but in reality, their entire field of play was defined by the initial, strategically placed number. They believe they are making an independent decision, when they are in fact merely orbiting the manipulator's starting point. The defense against this trick is to develop an external anchor. When faced with a large number, you must refuse to engage with it and instead, mentally or literally, retreat to your independently established research, budget, or true market value. The critical step is to pause, consciously ignore the presented number, and then introduce your own researched figure as a counter-anchor to reset the terms of the discussion.
Let's talk about the next trick, framing effect manipulation. Imagine you are a medical doctor discussing a complex surgery with a patient. The surgery carries a significant risk, and you must explain the odds to help the patient make an informed decision. You have two ways to present the exact same factual data. Frame A. There is a 90% chance of survival after this surgery. Frame B. There is a 10% chance of mortality after this surgery. If you present frame A, the patient is likely to feel optimistic and choose to proceed. The 90% survival rate anchors their mind on success and safety. If you present frame B, the patient is likely to feel fearful and choose to reject the surgery. The 10% mortality rate anchors their mind on danger and loss. The core information, the objective risk, is identical. Yet the way you package the information completely changed the emotional and behavioral response. This is the potent, invisible power of the framing effect. The framing effect is a cognitive bias where people react to a particular choice in different ways depending on how it is presented or framed, even if the two frames are objectively equivalent. The psychological trick of framing manipulation is the intentional selection of a specific rhetorical frame to steer the audience's emotion and judgment toward the manipulator's desired outcome. The tactic works by exploiting the mind's tendency to be profoundly influenced by the emotional and moral context of a statement rather than the raw data itself. Manipulators use two primary framing tools. Gain versus loss framing. Gain frame highlights what will be acquired or saved. This frame encourages risk-averse behavior. Example, using this new software will save you $100 per week. The audience is driven by the desire to secure the gain. Loss frame highlights what will be lost or what is at risk. This frame encourages risk-seeking behavior to avoid the loss. Example, if you don't use this new software, you will lose $100 per week. The negative frame is often more potent because humans are psychologically wired to feel the pain of a loss twice as strongly as the pleasure of an equivalent gain. Loss aversion. 2. Moral framing. Good versus evil. The manipulator frames their preferred action as morally righteous or fundamentally good, and any opposition as morally corrupt or evil.
In a political debate, a tax increase is not framed as a way to fund social programs, which is neutral. It is framed as a necessary sacrifice for the good of the nation's children, which is a moral gain. Opposition is then easily cast as a threat to our children, which is a moral loss. By using a moral frame, the manipulator shifts the debate from a matter of policy to a matter of character, discrediting dissent without engaging in factual argument. We see framing manipulation constantly in media and public relations. A news report on a violent protest will choose its frame. Clash between protesters and police leads to 5 arrests, which is relatively neutral, versus rioters assault law enforcement officers, which is a loss or moral frame. The choice of a single word determines the emotional reaction of the audience. The danger of this manipulation is that it allows the manipulator to control the narrative landscape. The victim is not truly making an informed, neutral decision. They are responding to the emotional coloring of the information. They are being led to believe that the way the information is presented is an intrinsic property of the information itself. The defense against this trick is to develop a habit of reframing. When presented with a choice, the critical step is to consciously convert the frame. If the choice is presented in terms of loss, immediately rephrase it in terms of gain. By forcing the mind to view the same information through 2 opposing lenses, you neutralize the emotional bias and reveal the objective facts, reclaiming your rational judgment.
Let's talk about the next trick, confirmation bias reinforcement. Imagine you have a private, nagging belief that your coworker, David, is lazy and incompetent. You've noticed a few times he's been late and a few errors in his reports. You don't have enough evidence to conclusively prove your belief, but the seed of doubt is planted. Then your manager approaches you and starts a conversation about a recent team failure. They don't mention David by name, but they subtly steer the discussion toward the importance of strong work ethic and attention to detail. You instantly recalled the times David was late and the errors in his reports. You interrupt your manager to say, "I know exactly who you mean. David is definitely the weak link on this team." Your manager nods knowingly and says, "Let's just keep an eye on things." In that moment, your private, unsupported suspicion was not only validated by the manager, a figure of authority, but your mind immediately and selectively sifted through your memories to find evidence that proved your pre-existing belief. You have just experienced the powerful trick of confirmation bias reinforcement. Confirmation bias is the human tendency to search for, interpret, favor, and recall information in a way that confirms or supports one's prior beliefs or values. The psychological trick of confirmation bias reinforcement is the deliberate, strategic presentation of information or the creation of an environment that gently guides the victim's selective memory and search patterns to validate the manipulator's agenda. The manipulator does not need to convince the victim of a new idea. They only need to activate and confirm the victim's pre-existing belief, making the victim feel that the conclusion was their own logical deduction. This tactic works by exploiting the mind's desire for internal consistency. It is cognitively easier to find evidence to support an existing belief than it is to discard a belief and build a new mental model. The manipulator provides the psychological permission for the victim to stop searching for contradictory evidence. Manipulators use this tactic in 3 primary ways. The leading question, the sift. The manipulator asks a question that is framed to draw out only supporting evidence. Don't you agree that sales have been down ever since we hired the new team? This ignores other factors like market changes or supply chain issues. The question forces the victim to only recall data points relevant to the new team's performance, reinforcing the conclusion that the new team is the sole problem. The shared secrecy, the validation. The manipulator confides a vague negative sentiment about a third party. "I just have a bad feeling about Sarah. She seems shifty." This acts as a signal to the victim. It is safe and correct to hold a negative view of Sarah.
The victim then unconsciously monitors Sarah's behavior, selectively registering every time Sarah is quiet, which is shifty, and ignoring every time Sarah is helpful, which contradicts the bias. The filtered information environment. In large-scale manipulation, like media or politics, the manipulator creates a closed information ecosystem where all incoming data is pre-filtered. A political echo chamber only reports on negative actions of the opposition and positive actions of its own side, ensuring the audience's belief that my side is good, the other side is evil, is never factually challenged, only constantly reinforced. The ultimate danger of this trick is the creation of a self-sealing worldview. The victim's mind becomes a closed loop where all new information is interpreted as proof of the existing belief, making them completely immune to evidence, logic, or contradictory data. The defense against confirmation bias reinforcement is to practice active disconfirmation. When a belief or a strong emotion about someone arises, the critical step is to consciously and deliberately seek evidence that disproves it. Force yourself to find 5 examples of David being competent, or 5 examples of Sarah being helpful. By intentionally searching for the contrary evidence, you break the reinforcing loop and restore the ability to make a truly objective judgment.
Let's talk about the next trick: social proof exploitation. Imagine you are walking down a crowded street. You look up and see a dozen people gathered in a circle, staring intently at the sky. They aren't pointing, just looking with focused concentration. You instinctively pause. You might not even know why, but you feel a sudden, irresistible urge to stop and look up too. What are they seeing? You feel that if they are all focused, there must be something critically important you are missing. This impulse, the powerful, often irrational drive to follow the lead of others, is the core principle of social proof. Social proof is a psychological phenomenon where people assume the actions of a large group in a given situation reflect the correct behavior. It is a mental shortcut, a survival mechanism born from the idea that if everyone else is doing it, they must know something I don't. The psychological trick of social proof exploitation is a manipulative tactic where a person or organization deliberately fabricates, exaggerates, or highlights the popularity or consensus around their product, idea, or behavior to compel others to conform. The goal is to bypass rational persuasion and trigger the audience's subconscious compliance reflex. This tactic is most effective in 2 critical scenarios. One is ambiguity. When we are unsure of what to do, like looking up at the sky, we look to others for clues. The manipulator ensures the environment is ambiguous, making the audience hungry for any form of direction. 2 is similarity. We are most influenced by people we perceive to be like us. The manipulator ensures the proof comes from a demographic that the target audience can easily identify with. Manipulators utilize several specific techniques to leverage this bias. The bandwagon effect, or the crowd. This is the sheer power of numbers. Sales pages proclaim over 1 million people have already signed up. This statement has nothing to do with the quality of the product. Its only purpose is to trigger the feeling that a massive, intelligent consensus has already been reached. To not sign up is to be the only person left out of a clear, popular decision. The testimonial and celebrity endorsement. The manipulator uses a third party, a celebrity, an expert, or a seemingly average person, to vouch for the product or idea. The message is simple. This person you trust or admire is doing it. Therefore, it is safe or correct for you to do it. Their approval transfers credibility. The manufactured urgency, or the line. In the service industry, a nightclub owner may tell a bouncer to let a line build up outside the door, even if the club is empty. The line itself becomes social proof that the club is desirable and exclusive, attracting more people than a direct advertisement could ever. The crowd creates the value. The danger of exploiting social proof lies in the phenomenon of pluralistic ignorance. In emergencies, if no one is immediately reacting, perhaps because everyone is privately waiting for someone else to act, everyone assumes that there is lack of reaction means there is no true emergency. Manipulators exploit this, creating a silent consensus of inaction that maintains their control. The damage is outsourcing personal judgment. The victim stops asking, "Is this right for me?" and starts asking, "Is this what everyone else is doing?" The defense against this trick is to force the transition from external, social proof, to internal, rational analysis. When you feel the pull to follow the crowd, the critical question is, what verifiable, objective evidence supports this action independent of how many people are already doing it? By insisting on individual, fact-based evaluation, you decouple your decision from the crowd's compelling but often baseless consensus.
Let's talk about the next trick, the Baader-Meinhof Phenomenon. Imagine you were having a conversation with a friend, and they use a rare, unusual word you've never heard before: serendipity. You don't pay it much mind. The next morning, you are reading the newspaper, and there is the exact same word, serendipity, in an article about a scientific discovery. That afternoon, you're listening to a podcast, and the host uses the word serendipity in a sentence. You stop. Your eyes widen. You think, "This is impossible. The universe is sending me a sign. This word is suddenly everywhere." You feel a powerful, uncanny sense of discovery and profound significance, as if a hidden pattern in the world has suddenly been revealed to you. This highly compelling illusion is the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon, or more formally, the frequency illusion. It is a cognitive bias where, after noticing something for the first time, you suddenly notice it seemingly everywhere, leading you to believe that the thing has actually increased in frequency. The psychological trick of exploiting the frequency illusion is a subtle but powerful form of manipulation where a person or group intentionally introduces a specific, novel idea, concept, or piece of information into a target's mind, knowing the mind will then automatically seek, find, and overemphasize its recurrence, creating the illusion of its widespread importance or relevance. The tactic works by exploiting the combination of two cognitive processes. One, selective attention, the anchor. The first time you encounter a new concept, like the word serendipity, your mind creates a new neural template for it. This new template acts as an anchor. Two, confirmation bias, the search engine. Once the anchor is set, your brain's perceptual filtering becomes temporarily sensitized to that specific item. It is not that the word is appearing more often, it's that your brain has started actively and unconsciously filtering the environment to confirm the presence of the anchor, completely ignoring the thousands of other words you see every day. The manipulator uses this knowledge to manufacture a sense of urgency, ubiquity, or inevitability around their message. The pre-launch seed. A marketing campaign doesn't immediately launch a product. Instead, it places subtle, almost subliminal references to the product's core concept, or even just its color or name, in unrelated media. When the full campaign launches, the consumer feels a shock of recognition and the manufactured belief that this is clearly the next big thing. I've been seeing it everywhere for weeks. The political whisper. A political operative wants to push a new, niche, or fringe idea, for example, a specific piece of legislation. They have a small number of paid advocates mention the idea one time in several different news outlets, social media feeds, and talk shows. The target audience, having heard it once, suddenly starts seeing that piece of legislation pop up everywhere. The illusion of frequency creates the belief that the idea is gaining massive organic momentum, forcing those on the fence to pay attention and take it seriously. The personal rumor. A manipulator might whisper a highly specific, damaging rumor about a target person to a few different people. The target then hears the rumor from multiple unrelated sources. Because the rumor is so specific and appears to be spreading quickly and independently, the target assumes it must be true, or at least a pervasive community consensus, despite the manipulator being the single source of the original seed. The danger of exploiting the Baader-Meinhof phenomenon is that it transforms an arbitrary piece of information into a compelling personal reality. The victim mistakes selective attention for objective frequency, leading them to feel personally and powerfully connected to a message or product that was, in fact, cold-bloodedly manufactured. The defense is to develop metacognitive awareness. When you notice something everywhere, you must pause and ask, is this thing actually appearing more, or is my brain just better at spotting it now? By distinguishing between subjective perception and objective frequency, you neutralize the illusion and maintain your rational perspective.
Let's talk about the next trick, mirror and matching. Imagine you are in a negotiation for a used car. The seller, a smooth talker, leans back in his chair, crosses his legs, and rests his chin on his hand. After a few seconds, you feel a natural impulse to relax your posture. So you lean back, cross your legs, and rest your chin on your own hand. He speaks slowly, in a deep, measured tone. Unconsciously, you drop your own voice a register and begin to speak a little slower yourself. When you start to talk about the price, he breathes a deep, deliberate sigh, and you find yourself sighing almost simultaneously. At the end of the negotiation, you feel a profound sense of connection with the seller, believing you found someone who gets you. He, of course, got the price he wanted, because he never truly engaged with you. He simply guided your subconscious mind into a state of agreement and trust. This is the nonverbal manipulation of mirroring and matching. Mirroring and matching are powerful psychological techniques rooted in the automatic, subconscious imitation of another person's posture, gestures, breathing, tone of voice, and even language patterns. While humans naturally mirror each other to build rapport and empathy, the exploitation of this mechanism is a manipulative trick used to rapidly build a false sense of trust, likeness, and agreement, making the target more compliant. The tactic works by exploiting the deep, unconscious connection between imitation and affiliation. When we see someone mirroring our behavior, our brain interprets this as a signal of safety and likeness. Subconsciously, we think, this person is like me, therefore they are safe, and their ideas are probably good for me. The conscious, critical mind is bypassed entirely by this primitive signal of rapport. Manipulators utilize this trick across all dimensions of interaction. Number 1, physiological matching, the body language lock. This is the crossing of the legs, the resting of the chin, and the adoption of similar posture. The manipulator starts by mirroring the target's posture precisely. Once the target is comfortable, the manipulator can subtly lead the interaction. If the manipulator slowly relaxes their own posture, the target will follow, putting them in a more compliant, passive state, making the manipulator's final words feel weighty and authoritative. Number 2, vocal matching, the tone echo. The manipulator matches the target's voice tempo, volume, and tonality. If the target speaks fast and high, the manipulator does too. Then, when it's time to deliver the critical information or the closing pitch, the manipulator intentionally lowers their tone and slows their pace. Because the target is mirroring, they follow suit, entering a slower, more deliberate, and less reactive mental state, making the manipulator's final words feel weighty and authoritative. Number 3, representational system matching, the language bridge. People naturally use language based on their preferred sense. Visual, I see what you mean. Auditory, that sounds right. Or kinesthetic, I feel good about that. The manipulator listens for the target's dominant sensory language and matches it.
If the target says, "I don't see how this will work," the manipulator replies, "Let me show you how clear the path looks." This creates an immediate subconscious feeling that the manipulator is communicating on the target's precise wavelength. The danger of this manipulation is that it creates an illusion of genuine connection. The victim feels a powerful, magnetic pull toward the manipulator, mistaking expertly faked synchronicity for authentic chemistry. This makes the victim drop their guard, share sensitive information, and assume the manipulator has their best interests at heart. The defense is to develop conscious incongruence. When you feel an uncanny connection with someone, pause and consciously break the mirror. Subtly change your own posture or vocal pace. If they immediately change to match you, you know you are being manipulated. By actively breaking the synchronicity, you force your rational mind back into the driver's seat.
Let's talk about the next trick: pacing and leading. Imagine you walk into a therapist's office, feeling anxious, speaking quickly, and gesturing wildly. A manipulative therapist or coach begins the session not by challenging you, but by pacing you. They speak with the same high energy, gesture wildly, and use your exact vocabulary. They say things like, "Yes, I hear that your mind is racing, and I see how much nervous energy you have right now." You feel profoundly understood. Your energy is mirrored, your experience is validated. The rapport is immediate and strong. After about 10 minutes of this intense pacing, the therapist begins to subtly lead the interaction. They slowly, deliberately lower their voice. They stop gesturing wildly and begin to use slow, measured hand movements. They guide their own breathing into a deep, slow rhythm. Because they have established such a strong, synchronized connection through pacing, your own mind and body automatically follow the lead. You unconsciously slow your speech, your breathing deepens, and your anxious energy dissipates. You leave the session feeling calm and believing that the therapist successfully solved your anxiety, when in reality, they simply manipulated your physiological state by guiding you from one state to another. This is the highly sophisticated, two-step psychological trick of pacing and leading. Pacing and leading is a covert communication and behavior influence tactic, often rooted in neuro-linguistic programming, NLP, where the manipulator first establishes deep rapport with a target, pacing, by precisely matching their verbal and nonverbal behaviors, and then subtly shifts their own behavior, leading, in a desired direction, causing the target to follow unconsciously. The process has two distinct and crucial stages. Stage 1, pacing, the synchronization. The manipulator observes and matches all observable behaviors of the target: physiology, matching posture, breathing rate, and gestures; tonality, matching voice volume, speed, and pitch; verbal, matching key vocabulary and preferred sensory language: I see, I hear, I feel. The goal of this stage is to get the target to consciously think, "Wow, this person really gets me," thus dropping all their social defenses and lowering their guard. Stage 2, leading, the shift. Once synchronicity is established, the manipulator slowly, subtly introduces a shift in their own behavior that aligns with their goal. If they want the target to buy, they shift their pace from fast talking to slow, deliberate, confidence-inducing speech. If they want the target to relax and accept a difficult decision, they shift their tense posture to a relaxed, open one. If they want to end an argument, they slowly introduce a calm, soothing tone and pace, which the argument-fatigued target unconsciously mirrors for relief. The ultimate danger of pacing and leading is the elimination of conscious resistance. The target believes they are making a decision based on their own feelings, but those feelings, calmness, acceptance, urgency, were chemically and physiologically induced by the manipulator's controlled behavioral shift. The victim is subtly controlled at the speed of nonverbal communication. The defense against this advanced technique is a deep awareness of your own physiology. When you feel a powerful, fast, and inexplicable rapport with a new person, you must pause. The moment you sense the shift in their demeanor or pace, you must consciously maintain your original state. If they slow down, you keep your original pace. By refusing to follow the lead, you break the synchronization, dismantle the bridge of false rapport, and force the interaction back to the realm of conscious verbal logic.